The film opens with Colt Seavers, a professional stunt performer, talking about how stunt teams have shaped movies and television for decades. These are the people who crash cars, take brutal falls, get set on fire, and make action stars look fearless on screen. Colt has taken more injuries than he can count, but he never complains much about the pain. For him, the job has always been worth it, especially because he gets to work close to Jody Morneau, a camera operator with dreams of becoming a director. Colt is completely in love with her, even if he doesn't always know how to say it properly. Later, Colt is called over by Tom Ryder, the big action star he doubles for. Tom and his producer, Gail, believe Colt showed too much of his face during a stunt, which is a problem because the audience is only supposed to see Tom as the hero. Tom tells Colt to repeat the stunt, this time making sure his face stays hidden. Around the same time, Jody asks Colt if he wants to grab a drink with her, but Colt tries to turn it into a beach date instead, clearly hoping for something more romantic. Colt prepares himself to redo the stunt, but during the take, something goes horribly wrong. The stunt fails, Colt crashes hard, and within moments, paramedics rush in and carry him away on a stretcher. Sometime later, Colt is back home, still physically and emotionally recovering from the accident. The injury has changed him completely, and he has walked away from stunt work. Gail calls him and asks if it's true he is now working as a valet at a restaurant. Colt is clearly embarrassed by where life has taken him, but he tries to act like he is fine. While working, he is recognized by someone from his old film world. The man mockingly calls him the Fall Guy and arrogantly orders him to park his car. Colt doesn't take the insult quietly. Instead, he drives the car around wildly, while the man inside panics and begs him to stop. Afterward, Colt tells Gail that he is done with the stunt business for good. He still blames himself for the accident and believes he is responsible for everything that went wrong. Gail tries to convince him to come to Sydney because she needs his help on a major production. At first, Colt refuses. But the moment he learns Jody is directing the film, his attitude changes and he agrees to go. When Colt arrives, stunt coordinator Dan wants to meet him after the team finishes 3D scanning his body so Tom Ryder's face can be digitally placed over his. Dan takes him onto the set and walks him through the stunt they need him to perform. Colt is nervous, and it's obvious the trauma from his accident is still sitting in his mind. He doesn't want history to repeat itself. Dan tries to motivate him with a quote from Rocky, hoping it will light a fire under him. Meanwhile, Jody is busy handling problems on set. She is discussing a prop with one of the handlers when another crew member suggests using visual effects instead of real fireworks. Before Jody even gives the signal, the pyrotechnics suddenly explode in the distance. Nigel shouts at the technicians, but Jody tells him to handle the situation calmly and speak to them properly. Then Venti informs Jody that the printer has stopped working, which is creating a serious problem for the third act of the movie. With everything falling apart around her, Jody gathers the crew's attention and makes it clear that everyone needs to focus and follow her instructions. Colt reaches the stunt area and checks the sand, testing whether it has the right consistency for the vehicle sequence. He becomes unsure and asks Dan to postpone the stunt. Dan tries to build his confidence, but Colt says Dan is only making him feel more cursed. Before he can back out, Jody steps in and asks Dan to move forward with the stunt. Colt still hesitates, but when Dan explains how much this film means to Jody, Colt finally agrees. He puts on the helmet and gives the signal that he is ready. Even though he is trying to stay calm, Colt tells Dan that the ground doesn't have enough grip and worries he might hit the camera. Jody, watching from the side, pushes him to get closer for the shot. Colt commits to the stunt, but the vehicle ends up smashing straight into the camera. Since they still have 7 more cameras rolling, Dan tells him to keep going. Colt pushes through, finishes the stunt successfully, and steps out without getting hurt. Jody is shocked when she realizes the stuntman is Colt. She pulls him aside, clearly not happy about the surprise. Colt explains that Gail was the one who brought him in and says he is genuinely happy to see Jody directing her own movie. Jody, however, is not interested in a reunion. She tells Dan to find another stunt performer, but Dan says there is no one else available. During the next stunt setup, Jody offers to explain the movie's story to Colt, assuming he hasn't read the script. She describes it as a romance between a space cowboy and an alien named Aliana. The cowboy gets injured, disappears without warning, and leaves Aliana behind. Colt immediately understands that Jody is really talking about their own past, but he continues with the stunt anyway. After he finishes, Jody adds that Aliana was devastated because she believed the space cowboy lied to her. Eventually, she moved on and started dating other humans. Then Jody tells Colt to repeat the stunt. She asks what the space cowboy would say for disappearing like that, but Colt wants to discuss it privately. Jody refuses and keeps the conversation out in the open. Colt finally answers through the metaphor. He says the cowboy would admit he made a mistake. He would say he regrets vanishing, and that he was scared he waited too long, afraid Aliana had already moved on. Colt tries to ask for another chance, but Jody avoids giving him the answer he wants and simply tells him to do the stunt again. Later, Colt meets Gail, who congratulates him on the successful stunt. But Colt is no longer in the mood for small talk. He confronts her for lying to him and making him believe Jody personally wanted him on the set. That is when Gail reveals the real reason she brought him there. Tom Ryder has gone missing. Gail explains that they cannot involve the police, because if the studio finds out their lead actor has disappeared, the entire movie will be shut down. She begs Colt to find Tom quietly, warning him that if Tom is not found soon, Jody's first directing job could also become her last. Gail gives Colt the access code to Tom's loft and tells him he has only 2 days to bring Tom back and save Jody's film. Colt gets into a car, but instead of focusing on the job, his mind drifts straight back to Jody. The emotions hit him harder than he expects, and he starts crying quietly in the driver's seat. A moment later, Jody appears beside the car and taps on the window. When she notices his tears, she asks why he is crying. Colt quickly tries to cover it up and claims it is just because of jet lag. Jody softens a little and apologizes for making him repeat the stunt so many times earlier. She climbs into the car and asks how he has been since everything happened. Colt simply gives her an awkward thumbs up, which only irritates her more because it feels like he is avoiding a real answer. Jody then admits that maybe she was wrong for trying to turn what they had into something serious, especially if it was only supposed to be a fling. Colt says he wanted to apologize to her for a long time, but he never knew how to do it properly. Jody tells him that if he plans to stay on the movie, they must keep everything strictly professional. Colt agrees, even though it is obvious there is still a lot left unsaid between them. After that, Colt heads to Tom Ryder's loft and uses the code Gail gave him. He steps inside and turns on the lights, but before he can look around, a woman suddenly attacks him with a sword. Colt barely manages to defend himself as she swings at him again and again. During the struggle, he recognizes her face. She introduces herself as Iggy, Tom's girlfriend and also the lead actress in Jody's film. She lunges at him again, but Colt manages to disarm her. That is when he realizes the sword is only a movie prop, not a real weapon. Colt asks Iggy where he can find Tom. She tells him that Tom often spends time at a particular club and suggests that Colt start there. She also warns him to meet a drug dealer named Dune and pretend to be Tom if he wants answers. Colt goes to the club and approaches Dune, who invites him to sit. Colt tells him he is actually a stuntman, and surprisingly, Dune shows him genuine respect. He asks Colt whether stunt performers get Oscars for their work, and Colt casually says they do not. Colt then takes a drink, but he quickly realizes something is wrong. The drink has been spiked, and soon he starts hallucinating. Before Colt can fully process what is happening, a group of thugs tries to grab him and drag him away. Even while drugged and disoriented, Colt fights back hard and manages to take them on. Dune tries to escape during the chaos, but Colt runs after him. Dune jumps into a taxi, and Colt, desperate to stop him, steps right in front of it. The cab slams into him, but Colt gets back up and demands answers. He forces Dune to tell him where Tom is. Dune admits he drugged Colt because Tom's head of security ordered him to do it. He explains that he usually delivers drugs to Tom's people at the Pendleton Hotel. He also tells Colt to find a man named Kevin there, because Kevin can give him the room keys. Before leaving, Colt asks how long the drug will stay in his system. Dune tells him it should last until he stops seeing unicorns. Still dealing with the effects of the drug, Colt heads to the hotel to meet Kevin. But instead of Kevin, he unexpectedly runs into Jody. She immediately notices the cuts and blood on his face and asks what happened. Colt lies and says he simply went out for a run. Jody then opens up about her own problems, explaining that the studio is pressuring her to change the ending of the movie and make it happier. Their conversation is cut short when Gail suddenly arrives and pulls Jody away. Kevin finally shows up and gives Colt a key card for the room. Colt tries to open the door, but the card does not work. Kevin gives him another one, but that also fails. Fed up with wasting time, Colt decides to break into the room himself. Not long after, Jody calls him, and the two begin talking about her ideas for the film. While they are speaking, Colt searches the room and makes a horrifying discovery. There is a dead body in the bathtub. He immediately calls Gail and tells her everything that has happened, from Iggy to Dune to the body in the hotel room. He He says he is going to the police, but Gail tells him not to worry and insists she will take care of it. Suddenly, a police officer knocks on Colt's car window. Colt brings the officer up to the hotel room to show him the body, but when they get there, the bathtub is empty. The corpse has completely vanished. The next day, Colt tells Dan that he wants to tell Jody everything about the dead body. Dan, however, reminds him that he was drugged at the time and suggests there is a chance the whole thing was just a hallucination. Dan also mentions that after Colt and Jody's phone conversation the night before, Jody made major changes to the stunt sequence. Colt later pulls Jody aside, hoping to talk, but she is focused on work. She tells him she wants to shoot the entire action sequence with him, then digitally replace his face with Tom's later in post-production. Colt agrees, and filming begins. This time he performs the whole sequence brilliantly, moving through every beat with confidence and precision. After the shoot, Jody invites him to karaoke, and Colt happily accepts. Just when things seem to be improving, Gail arrives and gives Colt a plane ticket home. She tells him that something serious is about to happen and that she does not want him caught up in it. Meanwhile, Jody waits for Colt at the bar, unaware of what Gail has just done. Instead of going straight to the bar, Colt meets Alma, Gail's assistant, and begins talking with her. Alma reveals that the last time she saw Tom was at a party. The next day, Gail called her because Tom had lost his phone, and Alma was the one who found it. She explains that the phone contains something powerful enough to destroy someone's career. Alma agrees to hand it over to Colt, but only on one condition. She wants a producer credit on Jody's movie. Before Colt can respond, two attackers suddenly shock him with tasers and kidnap Alma. Colt quickly jumps into a car with Jean-Claude, one of Alma's dogs, and speeds after the kidnappers. At the same time, Gail meets Jody at the bar and tells her she gave Colt a ticket to leave. Jody is upset because she still needs Colt to finish her movie. Gail tries to justify herself by saying she thought Jody wanted him gone. Meanwhile, Colt's chase turns wild. He crashes his car into a truck, then tells Jean-Claude to attack one of the men. Colt climbs onto the moving truck and starts fighting another attacker, while Alma joins the fight inside the vehicle and struggles with the driver. As the truck passes by the bar where Jody is singing karaoke, another car races toward Colt. He jumps away, grabs onto a bar for support, then swings himself back onto the truck. Alma manages to kick one of the men off the truck and takes control of the steering wheel. But when she slams on the brakes, Colt is thrown straight through the windshield and lands hard on the road. Surviving the crash, Colt goes to the bar, but Dan tells him Jody has already left. Colt then explains everything to Dan, including Alma, the phone, the kidnapping, and the missing body. Dan suggests they get help from Venti, the tech genius on the crew. Venti checks the phone and tells them it will take a few days to unlock it. Since they do not have that kind of time, Colt and Dan return to Tom's loft to search for the passcode. Dan eventually finds it, and Colt uses it to unlock the phone. They open a video and watch as Tom wrestles with his own stunt double. Colt immediately recognizes the man in the video. It is the same dead body he saw earlier in the hotel bathtub. In the video, Tom is seen wrestling with his stunt double, but the playful fight suddenly turns deadly when Tom accidentally kills him. Before Colt and Dan can even process what they have just watched, Venti calls Dan and tells him to turn on the news immediately. A report comes on revealing that the police have discovered the stunt double's body, and somehow Colt has already been named as the main suspect. Colt quickly sends several messages to Jody, trying to warn her and explain what is happening, but she does not see them. Moments later, a group of armed men closes in on Tom's loft. Dan and Colt are forced into a fight, using whatever they can to defend themselves. During the chaos, Jean-Claude lunges at one of the attackers, giving Colt enough time to point a gun at him, while Dan manages to take the man's shotgun. Dan steps outside to check if more men are coming, but the final attacker catches Colt off guard. He grabs the gun from Colt and shoots him. The attacker then calls someone and reports that Colt is dead, completely unaware that the bullets inside the gun were blanks. Colt survives, slips away, and escapes onto a boat, but before he can get far, he runs straight into Tom and is knocked unconscious. At the same time, Gail meets Jody and tells her that Colt is now suspected of murder. Jody refuses to believe it. She remembers how Colt once spent 23 minutes trying to remove a cockroach from her room because he could not bring himself to hurt it. To her, the idea of him killing someone makes no sense at all. Gail also tells Jody that Colt never made it to the airport, making the situation even more confusing. Colt wakes up tied to a chair, with Tom standing in front of him demanding his phone. Colt refuses to give it up. Tom then starts bragging and reveals the truth behind Colt's old accident. He admits that he tampered with the stunt equipment because he felt Colt was getting too much attention and making him look bad. Tom also explains that Gale helped organize the whole plan to frame Colt for the stunt double's death. Meanwhile, Jody finally tries to read Colt's messages, but Gale accidentally knocks her phone into a drink before she can properly see them. Back with Colt, Tom tells him more about Gale's scheme and again demands the phone. Colt says one of Tom's own men shot it earlier, which actually makes Tom happy because he believes the evidence has been destroyed. Tom orders his men to get rid of Colt for good. They begin pouring gasoline over him, preparing to burn him alive, but Colt uses his stuntman instincts and outsmarts them. He breaks free, escapes onto a boat, and speeds away. Tom's men chase after him, firing at him as he reaches a dock. Colt cuts the rope, hides, and quickly calls Jody. During the call, Colt finally tells her what he should have said a long time ago. He explains that after the accident, he felt like he had failed completely. He thought Jody deserved someone better, so instead of facing her, he disappeared. He admits that staying away from her hurt more than any stunt injury he ever suffered. Colt tells her he still loves her and asks her not to give up on the idea of a happy ending. Before Jody can fully respond, the attackers start shooting at him again, forcing Colt to end the call. He crashes the boat into a gas tank, causing a huge explosion. Jody tries calling him back, but one of the villains tells Gale that Colt is dead. Gale then passes the news to Jody, making her believe Colt has been killed. Dan also tries to message Colt, but his texts do not go through. Soon reporters arrive on set, announcing Colt's supposed death and showing a video where Colt's face has been digitally placed over Tom's. But Colt is not dead. He has survived the explosion and quietly swum back to the dock. Tom's men arrive at the movie set and begin searching for Dan, but Dan hides among the extras while wearing a disguise. Meanwhile, Jody is alone in her trailer when someone in a costume sneaks up behind her. Startled, she attacks the person, only to realize it is Colt. He quickly reveals the truth about Tom and Gale's entire plan. Overwhelmed and relieved, Jody kisses him, but their moment is cut short when Gale knocks on the trailer door. Jody hides Colt and lets Gale inside. Gale pretends she tried to help Colt, but says things did not work out. She then tells Jody that Tom has returned, and since Colt is gone, they will use special effects to complete the stunt scenes. Gale suggests Jody take a break, but Jody refuses. She says she is going to finish her movie herself. After Gale leaves, Colt and Jody come up with a plan to make Tom confess everything. Filming begins again, with Tom delivering a dramatic speech on set. Jody approaches him and explains that even though they are using visual effects, they still need him inside the car so they can capture his face properly. Tom agrees and gets ready for the scene. As part of the setup, they handcuff him inside the car while a crew member secretly attaches a microphone to his costume. Once Tom is seated, filming starts. Suddenly, Colt, wearing a mask, jumps into the car and drives away with Tom trapped inside. Tom's men immediately chase after them. Dan helps by blocking the road with carefully timed explosions, cutting off the pursuers. Colt then scares Tom by suggesting they perform a dangerous jump together, making it look like a murder-suicide if anything goes wrong. Terrified, Tom finally breaks. He confesses everything he and Gale did, admitting that they framed Colt because they were afraid the movie would collapse if the truth came out. What Tom does not realize is that his entire confession is being recorded through the hidden microphone on his outfit. Colt then completes the risky 250-foot jump successfully and walks away unharmed. Meanwhile, Gale orders Tom's men to help her get to the helicopter. She threatens the sound operator and steals the recording of Tom's confession. Jody tries to stop her and hits Gale, but one of Gale's men grabs Jody from behind. Jody fights back using a prop, and Jean-Claude jumps in to help her. Tom manages to escape and climbs into the helicopter with Gale. Around them, Dan and the other stunt performers start battling Tom's thugs in a massive behind-the-scenes brawl. Dan eventually takes down the main attacker and ties him up with a cable, leaving him hanging helplessly in the air. Colt makes one final daring move. He jumps onto the camera arm attached to a moving car and uses it to launch himself toward the helicopter. He climbs aboard and fights Tom and Gale as they try to stop him from recovering the confession. On the ground, Dan and the stunt crew prepare a giant airbag, using a car setup so Colt will have a safe place to land. Colt manages to grab the recording. Gale screams at Tom to shoot him, but Tom refuses, saying Colt is one of the best stuntmen in the business. Furious, Gale snatches the gun from Tom and tries to shoot Colt herself, only to discover the weapon is empty. The movie ends with Colt giving them one last defiant gesture before jumping from the helicopter. He lands safely on the airbag below, surviving yet another impossible stunt. Jody runs straight to him, amazed by what he has just pulled off. She admires his heroic stunt, and the two finally share a kiss. Number 1. Colt Seaver's fall from stardom to isolation. The movie opens with Colt Seavers in the exact kind of place where a stuntman like him belongs, right in the middle of controlled chaos. He is not the movie star, he is not the face on the poster, but he is the guy making that star look fearless. Colt is the stunt double for Tom Ryder, the big action hero who loves the spotlight and, of course, loves letting people believe he does all the dangerous stuff himself. And at this point, Colt seems completely comfortable with that life. He is confident, respected on set, and there is this easy charm about him that makes it clear he knows who he is. He is the guy who jumps, crashes, burns, rolls, falls, and somehow gets back up again. And then one stunt goes wrong, not in a small, walk-it-off kind of way. This is the kind of accident that breaks something deeper than just the body. Colt injures his back badly, and suddenly the entire rhythm of his life just stops. One moment he is part of this huge movie machine, surrounded by cameras, crew members, explosions, and adrenaline. The next, he is being rushed away from the set, and everything that made him feel useful starts slipping out of his hands. What works about this setup is that the film understands something simple about stunt performers. Their job is built on trust. Trust in the crew, trust in timing, trust in equipment, trust in your own body. So when Colt falls, it is not just a physical fall, it is also a collapse of confidence. And that is where the movie quietly becomes more interesting than the trailers might suggest. 18 months later, Colt is not living some glamorous retired action hero life. He is parking cars, picking up small tips, standing on the outside of the world he used to belong to. It is a funny image at first, because Ryan Gosling still looks like Ryan Gosling, even in this defeated mode. But underneath the comedy, there is something kind of sad about it. This is a man who used to throw himself into danger for a living, and now he cannot even face the people who knew him before the accident. The biggest casualty of that fall is not really his career, it is his sense of self. Colt does not just leave stunt work, he disappears from his own life. He cuts himself off from the film industry, from his friends, and most importantly, from Jody. Their relationship had been moving towards something real before the accident, but after getting hurt, Colt ghosts her. No proper goodbye, no mature conversation, just silence. And honestly, the movie could have done a little more with that part. You understand the basic emotional idea. He feels broken, embarrassed, maybe even unworthy. He does not want Jody to see him as the guy who fell and could not get back up. But the film does not fully sit with that pain for long enough. It gives us the outline of his isolation, and Gosling brings a lot of charm and wounded softness to it, but the writing sometimes rushes past the emotional damage because it wants to get to the fun stuff. Still, as an opening character setup, it gives Colt a clear place to start. He is not just a stuntman returning for another job. He is a man trying to recover the version of himself he lost on that set. The valet job is not just a joke. It shows how far he has fallen from the world of movie stunts and how uncomfortable he has become with the person he used to be. So when Gale calls him and pulls him back into that world, the real question is not just, will Colt find Tom Ryder? The real question is, can Colt be Colt again? That is the emotional hook underneath all the explosions, car rolls, jokes, and Hollywood madness. And when the movie remembers that, when it lets Colt's fall mean something, it gives the whole story a little more weight than you might expect from a glossy popcorn action comedy. Before the accident, Colt and Jody are not treated like some grand tragic romance. It is lighter than that, more casual on the surface. They flirt between takes, trade little looks, talk like two people who are trying not to admit how much they already like each other. And honestly, that is part of what makes it work. Their relationship feels like something that grew inside the weird bubble of a movie set. Long hours, dangerous work, cameras everywhere, people shouting instructions, explosions being prepared in the background, and somehow, in the middle of all that noise, these two find their own rhythm. Colt is the stuntman, Jody is behind the camera. He is the one putting his body on the line, she is the one watching the frame, and there is a sweet little balance there. They both belong to the same world, just from opposite sides of the lens. Then the accident happens, and Colt does the one thing that makes their romance harder to fully support. He disappears, not just from the industry, from Jody, no real explanation, no proper conversation. He just ghosts her, and the movie kind of expects us to understand why. And to a point, we do. He is injured, embarrassed, maybe ashamed. He probably cannot stand the idea of Jody seeing him as damaged or finished. That part makes sense emotionally, but still it leaves a gap, because from Jody's side it is not just heartbreak, it is confusion. One moment she has this connection with a guy who seems fully present, and then suddenly he is gone. No closure, no honesty, just silence. so when they meet again, there is already a lot sitting between them, even if the film sometimes plays it for laughs. That reunion is where the movie becomes a little messy, but also kind of charming. Colt comes back thinking Jody asked for him. Jody has no idea he is coming, so instead of this beautiful romantic comeback, it is awkward, uncomfortable, and honestly a little embarrassing for him. He's trying to act cool. She's trying to stay professional. Both of them are pretending they are over it, while clearly not being over it at all. That is the kind of tension the movie enjoys. Sometimes it works because Gosling and Blunt can sell those little uncomfortable pauses, the half smiles, the old hurt hiding under jokes, the way two people talk around the real issue, because saying it directly would make everything too serious too quickly. But this is also where the writing could have been sharper. The film knows Colt and Jody have emotional history, but it does not always know how deeply it wants to explore it. At times, their broken relationship feels like the heart of the story. At other times, it feels like another subplot squeezed between action scenes, Hollywood jokes, and the missing star mystery. And that is slightly frustrating because the material is there. You have a stuntman who lost his confidence. You have a woman who was abandoned without explanation. You have two people forced back onto the same movie set, surrounded by cameras, while making a film that is itself about love, distance, and dramatic nonsense. There is so much room for playful romance, painful honesty, and maybe even a little screwball chaos. The movie gives us pieces of that. Not always enough, but enough to keep watching. What helps is that Colt's regret feels real. He knows he messed up. He knows leaving Jody behind was not heroic or noble. It was fear. And Jody, for all her frustration, still has feelings for him. That is what makes their scenes watchable even when the dialogue gets a little too cute or stretched. Their relationship is not perfect as written, but it gives the movie its emotional engine. Because underneath all the stunt work and movie set madness, Colt is not only trying to solve a mystery. He's trying to fix the part of his life he ran away from. And Jody is not just waiting around to be won back. She has her own film to save, her own pressure to handle, and her own reason to be angry. That is what keeps the romance from feeling completely empty. It may not hit every emotional beat as strongly as it could, but the idea is solid. Two people who had something real, lost it through fear and silence, and now have to figure out whether the damage can actually be repaired. And in a movie this loud, that smaller emotional question matters more than you might expect. Colt's return does not happen because he suddenly wakes up one morning and decides, you know what, I'm ready to face my past. It is messier than that. And more Hollywood, he is pulled back in by Gail, the kind of producer who speaks with that dangerous level of confidence, where you can tell she is hiding at least 3 problems behind every smile. She calls Colt out of nowhere, acting like this is some simple professional favor, a job, a chance to get back on set, nothing too complicated, but of course it is complicated. Colt has spent the last 18 months avoiding this world, avoiding the noise, the cameras, the people who knew him before the fall. So when Gail reaches out, his first instinct is not excitement, it is resistance. He does not want to go back, not really, because going back means standing in the same kind of place where everything went wrong. And then Gail uses the one name that can still get through to him, Jody. She tells him Jody asked for him specifically, and that changes everything. Suddenly this is not just about stunt work anymore. It becomes personal. Colt may be scared of returning to the industry, but he is even more affected by the possibility that Jody still wants him there. That is the hook Gail uses, and it works. The funny thing is, Colt probably knows deep down that something feels off. A producer calling him after all this time, sending him across the world to Australia, making it sound like his ex personally requested him. It is all a little too convenient. But he wants to believe it. That is the important part. He wants a reason to go back. He wants a reason to see Jody again without having to admit that he is the one choosing it. So he flies to Australia, and the movie shifts back into the world of huge sets, stunt rigs, fake explosions, sci-fi costumes, and controlled madness. It is the exact opposite of the quiet, humiliating life he has been living as a valet. The contrast is pretty clear. Colt has gone from parking other people's cars to walking back into a blockbuster machine where everything is loud, expensive, and slightly insane. But the moment he arrives, the truth starts to come apart. Jody did not ask for him. That one detail gives the whole return a nice little sting. Colt comes in thinking there is maybe some romantic meaning behind the invitation, only to realize he has been played. Gail has not brought him back because of some emotional reunion. She has brought him back because Tom Ryder, the star of Jody's movie, has disappeared, and Colt is useful. That is Gail's real talent. She knows exactly how to turn people into solutions. Colt is not just an injured stuntman trying to rebuild himself. To Gail, he is someone who can save a production, find a missing actor, and quietly fix a disaster before the studio shuts everything down. That makes his return feel less heroic at first and more uncomfortable. He is being manipulated, absolutely. But at the same time, he also needs this. He needs to be pushed back into motion, because left alone, Colt would probably keep hiding from his old life forever. So Gale's call becomes the thing that drags him out of isolation, not gently, not honestly, but effectively, and that is what makes this setup work. Colt is not returning as a confident action hero. He is returning as a man who has been emotionally tricked into facing the two things he has been avoiding most, the job that broke him and the woman he hurt. From that point on, the movie has its engine. Colt thinks he is there to do stunts and maybe repair something with Jodie. Gale knows he is really there to find Tom. Jodie is trying to direct her first movie without realizing how deep the chaos already goes. And somewhere inside all of that, Colt is slowly being forced to become useful again. It is a very movie-ish setup, sure, maybe even a little ridiculous, but it works because it gives Colt a reason to step back into the fire before he is fully ready. And for a character like him, that is probably the only way it could happen. Jodie's side of the story is just as important here, because when Colt comes back into her life, she is not exactly sitting around waiting for emotional closure. She is trying to direct a movie, and not some small, quiet little drama where everyone whispers in rooms and drinks coffee between takes. No, Jodie's first feature is this huge sci-fi action production called Metal Storm, the kind of movie where everything looks expensive, everything is behind schedule, and every tiny problem somehow becomes a disaster. That detail matters because Jodie is not just dealing with an ex-boyfriend showing up at the worst possible time. She is dealing with the pressure of proving herself. She used to be a camera operator. Now she is the director. That is a big jump, and the movie does give you a sense that she is trying to hold this whole chaotic machine together while people around her keep making the job harder. The star is missing. The producer is hiding things. The set has its own problems. Even something as small as sand on a beach becomes another headache, and then Colt appears. From Jodie's point of view, that must be unbelievably annoying. She is already under pressure, already trying to keep her debut from falling apart, and suddenly the guy who vanished from her life is standing there, in the middle of her set like he has been invited back into the story. Which of course he sort of has, just not by her. That is what gives their reunion a sharper edge. Jodie is not only hurt, she is busy. She does not have time to stop everything and process what Colt did to her 18 months ago. She has a film to finish. She has a crew watching her. She has a studio waiting to see whether this production is going to survive. And that makes her frustration feel more grounded because Colt is not returning into a calm emotional space. He is walking straight into the most stressful moment of her professional life. There is something funny about that, honestly. The movie puts this broken romantic history inside a ridiculous blockbuster set, so instead of two people having a private conversation in a quiet room, they are trying to work through old feelings while cars are flipping, explosions are being planned, actors are missing, and everyone is pretending the production is still under control. That is where the film's movie-within-a-movie setup has real potential. Jodie is trying to direct fake chaos for the camera, while real chaos is happening around her. She's making a sci-fi epic about dramatic love and danger, while her own love life and actual danger start bleeding into the production. It is a clever idea, and when the film leans into that overlap, it becomes more than just a simple action comedy. But Jodie herself sometimes feels like she deserved more focus. The reviews keep circling this point in different ways. Some viewers liked seeing her enjoy the role, trying to get her film made while clearly still having feelings for Colt. Others felt the movie did not give her enough strong material, especially considering how important her debut is supposed to be. And I get that, because there is a really interesting version of this movie where Jodie's struggle as a first-time director is just as central as Colt's comeback. She is not only the love interest. She is a filmmaker trying to survive a massive production with a missing star and a producer who is not telling her the full truth. That could have carried even more weight. Still, the idea works. Jodie's debut gives the story its pressure cooker. Without that film being in danger, Colt's return would not feel urgent. Without Jodie trying to keep everything together, the romance would not have that awkward professional tension. And without the production chaos, the whole movie would lose that behind-the-scenes Hollywood flavor that makes it stand apart from a normal missing person caper. So even when the writing does not explore Jodie as deeply as it could, her situation gives the film a lot of its shape. She is directing her first movie. The lead actor has vanished. The production is close to collapse. Her ex has reappeared without warning, and somehow she still has to act like she is the one in control. That is a lot for any character to carry. And honestly, that pressure is one of the more interesting things about The Fall Guy, because it shows that in Hollywood, sometimes the biggest stunt is not jumping through fire. Sometimes it is simply getting the movie finished. The funny thing about The Fall Guy is that Colt does not come back to the movie business because anyone is being completely honest with him. He thinks he has been brought to Australia for Jodie, maybe to help her film, maybe to reconnect, maybe to finally fix the mess he left behind. But once he gets there, the movie quietly shifts gears and says, actually, there is another problem. Tom Ryder is missing, and that is where the story starts moving away from simple romantic comeback territory and into this strange little crime caper. Tom is not just some random actor who skipped work for a day. He is the star of Jodie's film. Without him, the whole production is in danger. The studio could pull the plug, Jodie's directorial debut could collapse, and everyone's carefully maintained Hollywood panic could become very real. So Gale needs someone to find him quietly, quickly, and preferably without anyone important noticing. That someone becomes Colt. Now, on paper, this is a pretty fun setup. A stuntman gets dragged into a real investigation, and all the fake action skills he has spent years using on movie sets suddenly become useful in actual danger. He knows how to fall. He knows how to take a hit. He knows how to crash through chaos and survive it. So when the mystery starts turning violent, Colt is weirdly prepared for it. Not emotionally, maybe, but physically, yes. The problem is that the mystery itself is not always the strongest part of the movie. It gives the film momentum, sure, but it also feels a little thin. Tom disappears, Colt starts looking, strange people show up, things get dangerous, and before long the plot is throwing in drugs, fights, dead bodies, unicorn hallucinations, car chases, and one increasingly messy conspiracy. It is entertaining, but it is also a lot. Sometimes the caper gives the movie exactly what it needs. It gets Colt out of the studio and into trouble. It lets the film move through Sydney with more energy. It creates space for action scenes, weird jokes, and that whole feeling of a stuntman accidentally becoming the hero of his own ridiculous action movie. That part works. But sometimes, honestly, the crime plot feels like it is fighting against the better movie hiding underneath, because the most interesting material is already there on the set. Colt trying to rebuild himself, Jodie trying to finish her first film, stunt performers finally getting the spotlight, and this chaotic production slowly falling apart. Whenever the movie pulls too hard into the missing star mystery, it can feel like we are being dragged away from the stuff that actually has more personality. Still, Tom Ryder's disappearance does serve a purpose. It exposes the fake heroism at the center of the film. Tom is the star everyone sees. Colt is the guy doing the work no one notices. Tom gets the attention, the image, the mythology. Colt gets the bruises. So when Tom goes missing and Colt has to clean up the mess, the movie is basically flipping the whole movie star fantasy inside out. The real hero is not the face on the poster. The real hero is the guy who usually gets erased from the poster completely. That is a strong idea, even if the plot around it can get clumsy. And as the mystery gets bigger, the film starts playing with that contrast more openly. Colt is not a detective. He is not some trained spy. He is a stuntman who keeps surviving because surviving dangerous nonsense is literally what he does for a living. There is humor in that. There is also a little poetry in it. But the caper does become weaker when it tries to get too clever. Some of the twists feel predictable. Some of the logic feels shaky. And by the time the movie reaches its later stretch, the whole conspiracy starts feeling less like a tightly built mystery and more like an excuse to keep throwing Colt into bigger, louder, more absurd situations. Depending on your mood, that is either part of the fun or part of the problem. For me, the missing Tom Ryder plot works best when it stays connected to the movie's stunt world identity. When Colt is using set instincts in real danger, when Hollywood fakery and actual violence start overlapping, when the film reminds us that this guy has spent his life making danger look cinematic, that is when the caper has flavor. When it becomes just another messy blockbuster mystery, it loses some of that spark. But as a story engine, it does its job. It pulls Colt back into action. It threatens Jodie's movie. It turns a romantic reunion into a survival mission. And it gives the film an excuse to ask a simple, very Hollywood question. What happens when the stunt double has to stop pretending and actually become the leading man? Tom Ryder is not really in the movie as much as you might expect, but that almost works in his favor, because the idea of Tom Ryder is bigger than the man himself. He is the kind of action star Hollywood loves to build myths around, the face on the poster, the guy in the interviews talking about commitment, intensity, risk, and how he likes to do things for real. You know the type. Everything is branded as bravery. Every dangerous shot becomes part of the legend. Every scar probably has a press junket story attached to it, except the joke, of course, is that Tom is not the one taking the real hits. Colt is. That contrast is one of the sharper things in The Fall Guy. Tom Ryder gets the glory, the fame, the image, and the applause, while Colt gets launched through cars, dropped from heights, burned, bruised, and then digitally or physically hidden behind someone else's celebrity. It is funny but also a little bitter in the way Hollywood truth can be bitter. The movie uses Tom as a walking parody of the superstar ego. He is vain, he is slippery, he is obsessed with how he looks. Even when he is not on screen, the entire production is orbiting around him. His disappearance does not just create a story problem, it creates an industry panic. Because in this world, the movie star is treated like the center of gravity. If Tom Ryder vanishes, suddenly hundreds of people's work, money, schedules, and futures are at risk. And that is ridiculous, but it also feels believable. Aaron Taylor Johnson seems to understand exactly what kind of character he is playing. He is not trying to make Tom subtle. He gives him that polished, fake cool energy, the drawl, the swagger, the movie star nonsense, the kind of confidence that feels rehearsed even when the character is supposed to be casual. There is a little bit of a celebrity impression in there, but not so much that it becomes only one joke. Tom is less of a person and more of a Hollywood disease. He represents the kind of actor who wants all the credit for danger without actually living with the consequences of it. He wants the audience to believe in the heroic image, but the whole image is built on other people doing the painful work. That is why the stuntman angle becomes more than just a gimmick. The film is basically saying, look at who gets celebrated and then look at who makes that celebration possible. That is a good idea. Maybe the movie could have pushed it even further, honestly. Tom's vanity is funny, but there is a sharper satire hiding inside him. The fake humility, the celebrity branding, the obsession with image, the way everyone keeps protecting the star because the business depends on him, even when he is the problem. All of that is there, but the film sometimes treats it more as flavor than as a full punch. Still, when Tom works, he works. He is annoying in the right way. He is the kind of character you enjoy watching because you are already waiting for the movie to cut him down to size. And there is something satisfying about a story where the fake hero gets exposed while the invisible hero is forced into the spotlight, because Colt is everything Tom pretends to be. Colt is physically brave but not loud about it. He is skilled, but he is not selling a brand every 5 seconds. He does not need to convince people he is tough. His whole life has been built around taking punishment and making it look effortless. Tom performs heroism for cameras. Colt performs danger for real. That difference gives the movie one of its clearest themes. It is not just about a missing actor. It is about the machinery that turns actors into legends while keeping the people behind those legends in the shadows. Tom Ryder is funny because he is exaggerated, but the joke lands because the industry around him feels familiar. The star gets worshipped, the stuntman gets replaced, and the Fall Guy, for all its messiness, knows there is something deeply unfair about that. A big reason the Fall Guy stays alive, even when the story starts wobbling, is Ryan Gosling. That sounds like an obvious thing to say, because yes, he is the lead actor. He is supposed to carry the movie. But here, he is doing more than just moving from one action scene to the next. He is carrying a tone that could have fallen apart very easily. Colt Seavers is a strange role in some ways. He has to be cool, but not too cool. Funny, but not in a loud, desperate way. Hurt, but not so broken that the movie becomes heavy. Romantic, but still awkward enough that you believe he is a guy who completely messed up his own relationship. And on top of that, he has to look believable as a stuntman while still being the movie star version of a stuntman. That is a tricky balance. Gosling makes it look easy. There is something naturally watchable about the way he plays Colt. He does not push too hard. He lets the charm sit slightly under the surface, which is important because Colt is not supposed to be walking around like a man who knows he is the hero. He is actually a little embarrassed by himself. He has been hiding from his old life. He knows he hurt Jody. He knows he has lost some part of himself after the accident. So Gosling gives him this relaxed, wounded quality. He can throw a joke away like it is nothing, then suddenly look like a man who has been carrying shame for a year and a half. That is where the performance works best, not when he is simply doing the handsome action star thing, although he can obviously do that. It works when you see Colt trying to pretend he is fine, and the mask slips just enough, because Colt is not fearless anymore. He used to be the guy who could jump, crash, burn, fall, and get back up like it was just another day at work. But after the accident, every return to danger has a little ghost attached to it. Gosling does not overplay that, and honestly, that is the right choice. This is still a popcorn action comedy. Nobody is asking for a full psychological breakdown between car rolls, but he gives Colt enough insecurity that the comeback feels personal. And then there is the comedy. Not every joke in the movie lands. Some of the writing is too cute. Some of the banter stretches longer than it should, but Gosling has a way of making weak lines feel a little lighter just through timing. He knows how to play confusion. He knows how to look completely out of his depth without losing the character's dignity. And he is especially good at reacting to absurdity, which matters in a movie where the plot keeps getting more ridiculous. He also understands that Colt is funniest when he is trying to stay professional in situations that are absolutely not professional. He is beaten up, lied to, dragged around Sydney, thrown into danger, and somehow still behaves like a guy who has spent years on movie sets where chaos is just part of the job. That is a nice detail. Colt does not panic like a normal person because he is used to fake danger, but real danger keeps surprising him because, well, nobody called cut. That is where Gosling's performance gives the movie some extra flavor. He plays Colt like a man who understands the choreography of violence but not always the reality of it. He can take punishment, but he still feels it. He can act cool, but only for a few seconds before the situation gets too stupid to pretend anymore. And yes, the movie definitely uses his star power. The looks, the swagger, the sad boy softness, the comic awkwardness, it is all there. Sometimes the film leans on that charm so heavily that you can feel it covering up script problems. A scene may not be written with much depth, but Gosling gives it enough personality to keep it moving. A joke may not be brilliant, but his delivery makes it passable. A romantic beat may feel familiar, but he gives Colt just enough regret to make you stay with him. That is not nothing. In fact, without Gosling, this movie probably feels much more ordinary. Maybe even completely disposable, because the screenplay often needs someone who can turn simple material into something warmer and more human. Colt could have easily been just another action comedy laid. Injured hero, old flame, missing star, big stunts, sarcastic lines. But Gosling makes him feel more specific than that. He is not just playing a stuntman. He is playing a man who is trying to become comfortable in his own skin again, someone who wants to be useful. Someone who wants to be loved but does not quite trust himself enough to ask for it directly. Someone who can survive a car crash more easily than an honest conversation. That is the character, and that is why his performance matters. Even when the Fall Guy gets too crowded, too silly, or too stretched out, Gosling keeps giving the movie a center. He makes Colt charming without making him smug, damaged without making him miserable, funny without turning him into a cartoon. For a film this busy, that kind of calm movie star control is probably the real stunt. Jodie is in an interesting position in The Fall Guy because she is not just written as Colt's old love interest. At least she should not be. She has her own pressure, her own movie, her own crew watching her, and her own professional mountain to climb. When we meet her again after the time jump, she is moved from camera operator to director, and that alone gives her character a lot more weight than the usual romantic comedy setup. She is not simply waiting for Colt to return. She's trying to survive her first major film, and Emily Blunt plays that pressure well. There is a nervous energy to Jodie, but not in a weak way. More like someone who knows this opportunity matters and is trying very hard not to let the whole thing collapse in front of everyone. She's dealing with a missing star, a difficult production, a producer who is clearly managing several hidden disasters, and then suddenly, her ex shows up on set like an emotional problem with perfect hair. That is a lot. Blunt gives Jodie this mix of frustration, confidence, and vulnerability that makes her scenes with Colt feel watchable, even when the writing is not always helping her. She can be sharp with him and you understand why. He hurt her. He vanished. He left her with no real explanation. So when he returns, there is still affection there, but it is buried under embarrassment, anger, and professional stress. That is probably the best part of her performance. She does not play Jodie as someone who has completely moved on, because clearly she has not. But she also does not play her like someone whose entire life stopped because Colt disappeared. Jodie has kept moving. She has built something. She has earned the director's chair, and now Colt has to walk back into a life that continued without him. That gives their dynamic a nice little edge. Still, the movie does not always give Blunt enough room. That is one of the more frustrating things here. Jodie has all the ingredients of a stronger character than the film fully allows her to be. A first-time director trying to complete a giant sci-fi action movie while her lead actor is missing. That could have been a whole movie by itself. Add in the return of the man who broke her heart, and there is plenty of emotional and professional conflict to explore. But sometimes she gets pushed into the background of Colt's journey. The film is called The Fall Guy, so obviously Colt is the center. That makes sense. But Jodie's situation is so naturally compelling that you do occasionally wish the movie trusted her perspective a little more. We see her reacting to chaos, managing the set, trading banter with Colt, and trying to hold on to control. But there are moments where it feels like the film could have gone deeper into what this debut means to her. Because for Jodie, this is not just a romantic reunion. This is her shot. If the production fails, she is not simply losing a movie. She is losing the chance to prove herself in a system that probably does not hand out second chances very kindly. That makes her stress more important than the movie sometimes admits. Blunt brings enough presence to suggest all of that, even when the script only sketches it. Now, the reactions to her performance are clearly mixed. Some viewers feel she looks like she is enjoying herself, especially in the more playful scenes. Others feel she is underused, miscast, or not quite as lively as she could have been. And honestly, both reactions make sense depending on which part of the movie you are focusing on. When Blunt gets to be irritated, funny, slightly wounded, and professionally overwhelmed, she works. When the movie asks her to carry longer romantic conversations that do not have enough spark on the page, the scenes can feel stretched. Not because she lacks talent, obviously. It is Emily Blunt. She knows how to hold a frame. But the material does not always rise to her level. That is the difference. There are flashes where Jodie feels like a real person trapped inside a very shiny action comedy machine. Then there are other moments where she feels more like a function in Colt's comeback story. The ex he must apologize to, the director whose movie he must save, the emotional prize waiting somewhere inside the chaos. The better version of the film would have balanced that more carefully. Still, Blunt gives Jodie warmth. She gives her irritation a human reason. She makes the old affection believable enough that the romance does not completely fall apart, even when the script is rushing or circling the same emotional beat. And she brings a slightly grounded quality to a movie that is constantly trying to spin 5 plates at once. So while Jodie may not be the strongest written character in the film, she is still important. She gives Colt something personal to come back for. She gives the movie set chaos a real point of pressure. And she reminds us that behind all the action, the stunts, the missing movie star, and the Hollywood satire, there is also a woman trying to make her first film while dealing with the one person she probably least expected to see again. That is a strong setup. I just wish the movie had trusted it a little more. The chemistry between Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt is one of those things that almost decides the entire movie, because The Fall Guy is not just selling stunts. It is selling banter. It is selling awkward looks across a movie set. It is selling two people who clearly had something, ruined it, and are now trying to act like they can be normal around each other, while everyone else is blowing things up in the background. That is not easy to make work, and for the most part, Gosling and Blunt do give the film a real spark. Not always a huge, electric, old Hollywood kind of spark, but something softer and more playful. Their scenes are built on discomfort as much as romance. Colt knows he messed up, Jodie knows he knows, and both of them keep trying to hide the obvious by talking around it. That is where they are fun together. Gosling brings that wounded, slightly goofy charm, like a man who can survive being thrown through a windshield, but somehow cannot survive one honest conversation with his ex. Blunt plays Jodie with this sharp, irritated warmth, where you can tell she wants to stay angry, but Colt keeps making that inconvenient. There is a nice rhythm to that. The best moments between them do not feel like polished romantic speeches. They feel like two people trying to regain a language they used to speak easily. There is hesitation, there is teasing, there is embarrassment. There are those little pauses where the joke ends and the real feeling almost comes out, then someone dodges it. That feels human, but the movie does not always know when to stop pushing the romance. Sometimes the banter is charming. Other times, the conversations stretch just a little too long, and you can feel the script trying to squeeze emotion out of scenes that should have been sharper or shorter. The chemistry is there, but it is not strong enough to carry every repetitive beat the movie throws at it. And that is probably why the reactions are so divided. Some viewers look at Gosling and Blunt and see the whole reason the movie works. They have movie star presence, they look good together, they are funny enough together, and they make even the weaker material feel lighter. For that audience, the romance gives the film its heart, but others clearly do not feel the spark at all. And I can understand that too, because the film sometimes tells us their connection is powerful more than it fully proves it. The breakup is underexplained, the emotional wound is rushed, and their reunion depends heavily on the actors filling in the gaps. When the writing gives them something playful, they lift it. When the writing asks them to carry deeper romantic pain, the scenes can feel a little thin. That is not really their fault. The movie wants their relationship to be cute, funny, bruised, emotional, and screwball all at once. It wants them to argue like exes, flirt like new lovers, and heal old damage while also keeping the action comedy pace moving. That is a lot to ask from any pairing. Still, their dynamic gives the film something it badly needs. Warmth without Colt and Jodie's connection, the movie could easily become just a chain of stunts, jokes, and Hollywood references. Their relationship gives the chaos a reason to matter. Colt is not only trying to save a production or solve a mystery, He is trying to stand in front of the person he hurt and become someone she can trust again. That emotional layer helps. Even when the romance is imperfect, it keeps the movie from feeling completely mechanical. There is a little sadness under the flirting, a little regret under the comedy, a little history under every awkward exchange. And when Gosling and Blunt are allowed to simply bounce off each other naturally, the film feels more alive. The problem is not that they have no chemistry. The problem is that the movie sometimes leans on that chemistry as if it can solve everything. It cannot fix a thin plot. It cannot erase pacing issues. It cannot make every joke land, but it can keep you invested enough to follow Colt and Jody through the mess, and that counts for something. So yes, the chemistry is uneven depending on the scene. Sometimes it shines. Sometimes it feels forced by the script. But at its best, it gives the Fall Guy a relaxed, romantic pulse beneath all the noise. And in a movie this loud, that little pulse makes a difference. The romance in The Fall Guy is a strange thing, because depending on the scene, it can feel like the movie's emotional center, or the thing slowing everything down. And that is probably why people are so split on it. On paper, Colt and Jody's relationship makes sense as the heart of the story. He gets hurt, loses his confidence, runs away from his old life, and in the process, he abandons the one person who actually mattered to him. Then 18 months later, he is pulled back into her world at the worst possible time. She's trying to direct her first movie. He is trying to pretend he is not still completely affected by her. The whole setup has romantic comedy energy built right into it. It should be charming, and sometimes it is. There are moments where the awkwardness between them works really well. Colt is trying so hard to be casual that he becomes even less casual. Jody is trying to stay professional, but every conversation has this little emotional bruise underneath it. They are not strangers. They are not enemies. They are two people who had something real, and now they are stuck pretending the past is not sitting right there between them. That is good material. The problem is that the film keeps circling the same emotional point without always deepening it. Colt is sorry, Jody is hurt. Colt wants another chance. Jody is not ready to just hand him one. That is a solid base, but after a while, some of the romantic scenes start feeling like they are stretching one feeling across too much screen time. And in a movie that already has stunts, a missing actor, industry satire, meta jokes, action scenes, and a whole movie within a movie structure, that becomes noticeable. The romance is supposed to give the chaos some feeling. But when it lingers too long, it can make you want the film to move forward. Not because the relationship is unimportant, but because the movie does not always find a fresh angle on it. That is where the missed opportunity comes in. There is a version of this romance that could have been sharper, funnier, maybe even more ridiculous. Two exes forced to work together on a massive sci-fi action set while everything around them goes wrong. That could have been full screwball chaos. Fast dialogue, petty arguments, romantic tension mixed with professional disaster, old feelings coming back at exactly the wrong time. The movie has pieces of that, but it never fully commits. Instead, it sometimes falls into longer conversations that feel more cute than necessary. You can see what it is going for. It wants that big romantic warmth. It wants the audience to root for them. It wants the love story to soften the action and make Colt's comeback more personal, but the execution is uneven. For some viewers, the romance works because Gosling and Blunt are simply enjoyable to watch. They bring enough charm that even familiar scenes feel pleasant. Their history gives the film a reason to breathe between explosions. And honestly, in a loud action comedy, a little emotional softness can be refreshing. For others, though, the romance becomes the weak link. It takes up too much space. It slows the pacing. It does not always have enough passion. And because Colt's original decision to ghost Jody is not explored deeply enough, the emotional repair can feel a little too easy. The movie wants us to feel the wound, but it also wants to keep things light, so it never fully lets the damage sit. That creates a slight problem. If the romance is going to be central, it needs more weight. If it is going to be playful, it needs more bite. The Fall Guy often lands somewhere in the middle, where the relationship is sweet enough to follow, but not always strong enough to dominate the movie. Still, I do think the romance matters. Without it, Colt's return would just be another action setup. With it, he has something personal at stake. He is not only trying to find Tom Ryder or save Jody's film. He is trying to prove that he is not the same guy who disappeared when life got hard. He is trying to become someone who can stay. That is the part that works. The romance may drag in places, and it may not reach the screwball energy it could have had, but it gives Colt's journey a human shape. Behind all the stunts and jokes, this is still a story about a man who fell, ran away, and now has to face the person he hurt most. So yes, the love story is messy, but maybe that is also why it fits the movie. Everything in The Fall Guy is a little messy. The production, the mystery, the emotions, the tone. Colt and Jodie's romance is no different. It does not always move smoothly, but when it finds the right rhythm, it gives the film a warmer heartbeat than the action alone ever could. The biggest issue with The Fall Guy is not that the story is impossible to follow. It is that once you strip away the charm, the explosions, the movie set chaos, and Ryan Gosling being very watchable, the actual plot underneath is pretty thin. You can feel the movie trying to move fast enough that you do not think about it too much. Colt gets injured, Colt disappears, Gail calls him back, Jodie is directing her first film, Tom Ryder is missing, Colt has to find him. Then suddenly there are shady people, strange clues, dangerous situations, a conspiracy, and the whole thing starts snowballing into bigger and louder set pieces. It is not confusing in a deep way. It is just not very strong. The film has a lot of ingredients, but the story sometimes feels like the tray holding them together rather than the meal itself. It gives the characters somewhere to go, something to chase, and enough danger to justify the stunts, but it rarely feels like the mystery is the thing we truly care about. And that is a problem because the movie clearly wants to be more than just a stunt reel. It wants romance. It wants comedy. It wants Hollywood satire. It wants to be a love letter to stunt performers. It wants to play with the idea of a movie being made inside a movie. All of that is fun, but the main plot has to be strong enough to carry those pieces. Here, it often feels like the opposite is happening. The pieces are carrying the plot. The missing Tom Ryder storyline works as a setup, but it does not always build with enough tension. Tom disappears, Colt investigates, and things get dangerous, but the film never really creates that feeling of a mystery tightening around him. Instead, it can feel like one random situation after another. A fight here, a chase there, a weird joke, a clue, another stunt, another twist. Some of it is entertaining in the moment, but when you step back, the structure feels loose. That is where the criticism of the screenplay starts making sense. The movie has energy, but energy is not the same as storytelling. A good action comedy still needs rhythm. It still needs setups that pay off. It still needs emotional stakes that grow instead of just repeating. It still needs a reason for the audience to lean forward beyond, what stunt are they going to do next? And The Fall Guy does not always have that. The plot is predictable in places, messy in others, and sometimes so broad that it feels like the movie is hoping its personality will cover the gaps. To be fair, sometimes it does. The cast helps. The stunts help. The soundtrack helps. The whole behind-the-scenes Hollywood setting gives the film enough flavor that you are not bored every minute. But there is a difference between being entertained and being fully invested. A lot of the time, I was entertained. I just was not always invested. That is the frustrating part, because the basic idea is not bad at all. A broken stuntman returning to the industry, reconnecting with the woman he hurt, and getting pulled into a real-life action plot while working on a fake action movie, that is a strong concept. There is plenty of room there for fun, emotion, danger, and satire. The movie just does not always shape it into something sharp. Instead, it often feels like the story exists to make room for everything else. Need a fight scene. The plot will push Colt into one. Need a joke about Hollywood. The plot will pause for it. Need another romantic moment. The plot will bend around Colt and Jodie. Need a final act full of chaos. The story will suddenly become bigger, sillier, and less believable. That can work in a pure popcorn movie, but only if the ride is smooth enough. Here, you can feel the bumps. The screenplay is not empty exactly. There are good ideas inside it. Colt's fall from confidence, Jodie's first movie, Tom Ryder's fake hero image, Gail's manipulation, the stunt world tribute. These are all pieces with potential. But they are not always connected with enough care. So the film ends up feeling both busy and thin at the same time. That is a strange combination, but it fits The Fall Guy. There is always something happening, yet the central story does not always feel rich. The movie is loud, colorful, and full of movement, but the plot underneath can feel generic, like a familiar action comedy skeleton dressed up with better actors and bigger stunts. And maybe that is why the final reaction becomes so mixed. Some viewers will not mind. They will come for Gosling, Blunt, the stunts, the jokes, the soundtrack, and the popcorn mood, and they will get enough of that to have a good time. But if you are looking for a story that really holds together, builds tension, and gives the characters a deeper emotional journey, The Fall Guy may leave you wanting more. Because the movie has the body of a blockbuster. It just needed a stronger spine. The strange thing about The Fall Guy is that it often feels like a movie written around moments, not around momentum. There are jokes, there are stunts, there are romantic beats. There are meta little comments about Hollywood and filmmaking. There are references, callbacks, exaggerated characters, and a mystery plot trying to push everything forward. But the screenplay does not always make those pieces feel like they belong to the same clean engine. And that is where the movie starts to wobble. You can see what the writing is trying to do. It wants to be quick. It wants to be playful. It wants to sound like people are having fun on set and behind the scenes. It wants Colt and Jody to have that messy exes who still like each other banter. It wants Gail to come across as a fast-talking producer with a secret agenda. It wants Tom Ryder to feel like a ridiculous celebrity parody. None of those choices are wrong. The issue is that the dialogue sometimes feels like it is trying too hard to prove how fun the movie is. A line will land, and then another one will come right after it, and then another. And after a while, you can feel the film pushing for charm instead of letting charm happen naturally. The better jokes work because the actors know how to throw them away. Gosling especially can take a small, silly line and make it feel casual. Blunt can sharpen a weak exchange just by adding irritation underneath it. But not every scene has that ease. Some conversations stretch. Some jokes feel obvious. Some emotional lines feel like they are circling the same point again and again. And with a movie this crowded, weak dialogue becomes more noticeable because the screenplay is already juggling too much. It is trying to be an action movie, a romance, a comedy, a Hollywood satire, a mystery, and a tribute to stunt performers. So when the writing gets loose, the whole thing starts to feel less like controlled chaos and more like everyone is improvising their way through an expensive production. There's also a difference between cheesy dialogue and lazy dialogue. Cheese can be fun. This kind of movie almost needs a little cheese. It is built on stunt doubles, missing movie stars, fake sci-fi sets, old-school action energy, and ridiculous Hollywood personalities. A certain amount of corniness belongs here. The problem is when the cheese does not have enough bite behind it. That happens a few times. The film wants its banter to feel witty, but sometimes it lands closer to cute. It wants the industry jokes to feel sharp, but some of them feel like surface-level nods. It wants the romance to feel bruised and funny, but the conversations between Colt and Jody can become too long for how little new emotion they add. And when a scene is mostly dialogue, you start to feel the weakness of the writing more clearly. That is especially true because the movie has a genuinely strong concept: a stuntman returning after a career-breaking accident. His ex now directing a giant movie, a missing star who takes credit for other people's danger, a producer manipulating everyone to keep the film alive. This material should have had more snap, more precision, more emotional punch. Instead, the screenplay often chooses noise, not literal noise, although there is plenty of that too, but narrative noise, extra jokes, extra references, extra side characters, extra plot complications, extra little bits that keep the movie busy without always making it better. That is why the dialogue can feel uneven. At its best, it has a loose, enjoyable rhythm. Colt's awkward attempts to reconnect with Jody have a nice embarrassment to them. Tom's celebrity nonsense is amusing. Gail's polished producer energy gives the film some bite. There are lines that do land, and a few jokes are clever enough to sneak up on you. But at its weakest, the writing feels overstuffed and undercooked at the same time. That sounds unfair, but it is really the central problem. The movie has too many ideas and not enough discipline. It keeps adding flavor, but the base is not strong enough. A better screenplay would have known when to slow down, when to cut a gag, when to let a romantic moment breathe, and when to stop explaining its own cleverness. Because the audience does not need every scene to wink at them. Sometimes we just need the story to move, and that is where The Fall Guy struggles. The actors are game, the stunts are strong, the production has energy. But the writing does not always support them with the kind of clean structure and sharp dialogue that could have turned a fun movie into a great one. It is still entertaining, yes, but you can feel the missed opportunity in the script. This did not need to be a deep, serious screenplay. It just needed to be tighter, funnier, more confident, less crowded, more willing to let the best ideas laid instead of throwing every possible idea into the mix. Because even in a popcorn action comedy, writing matters, maybe especially there. When the story is silly, the structure has to be strong. When the characters are broad, the dialogue has to be sharp. When the action is big, the emotional beats have to be simple but clear. The Fall Guy has moments where it understands that. It just does not understand it consistently enough. One of the easiest ways to describe The Fall Guy is also one of the biggest problems with it. There is a lot of movie in this movie, and I do not mean that as a simple compliment. On one level, you can appreciate the ambition. This is not just a stunt action film. It is also a romantic comedy. It is also a mystery about a missing movie star. It is also a behind-the-scenes Hollywood satire. It is also a tribute to stunt performers. It is also a meta movie about making a movie. It has 80s nostalgia, inside jokes, pop culture references, big action set pieces, awkward romance, industry commentary, post-credit material, and a fictional sci-fi epic happening inside the actual film. That is not a small plate, that is a buffet. And the thing is, a lot of those ingredients are enjoyable on their own. The stunt tribute works. The romance has charm in certain moments. The Hollywood jokes can be fun. The movie within a movie setup gives the story personality. Tom Ryder's ego is a good target. Colt's comeback gives it some emotional shape. Even the mystery has enough movement to keep things from going completely still. But when all of these pieces are thrown together at the same time, the movie starts to feel crowded. It is constantly switching modes. 1 minute, Colt and Jody are having an emotional conversation about what happened between them. Then suddenly we are back in action comedy territory. Then the film wants to joke about movie production. Then it wants to turn into a thriller. Then it cuts back to fake sci-fi scenes from Metal Storm. Then it gives us a stunt showcase. Then another bit of romance. Then another joke. Then another reference. After a while, you can feel the movie trying to keep every ball in the air. And yes, sometimes that gives it energy. There is a kind of restless fun to the way the Fall Guy moves. It does not want to sit still. It wants to entertain you from every possible angle. It wants to be playful, romantic, explosive, self-aware, nostalgic, and heartfelt all at once. You can feel the filmmakers trying to make a big, generous crowd pleaser, but generosity can become clutter. That is where the film runs into trouble. Instead of letting its strongest ideas breathe, it keeps stacking more on top of them. The stunt work should be the main event, but sometimes it has to share space with too many jokes and plot complications. The romance should have emotional weight, but it gets squeezed between chases, industry satire, and mystery beats. The missing star caper should create tension, but the film keeps interrupting that tension with comedy and meta-commentary, so nothing completely takes over. And that can be frustrating, because there are several better, cleaner versions of this movie hiding inside the final cut. There is a great stunt world movie here about the invisible workers behind blockbuster cinema. There is a fun romantic comedy about two exes forced to work together on a disaster production. There is a sharp Hollywood satire about fake movie star heroism and the people who actually take the risks. There is even a lean action caper about a stuntman accidentally becoming the real hero. But the Fall Guy tries to be all of those at once. Sometimes it gets away with it because the cast is likable and the pace is lively. Gosling can smooth over a lot. Blunt brings warmth. The stunts bring spectacle. The soundtrack keeps pushing everything forward, so while you are watching it, you might not feel every problem immediately, but you do feel the overload, especially as the movie goes on. The more it adds, the less impact each individual piece has. A clever joke gets buried. A romantic beat passes too quickly. A stunt that should feel huge becomes just another thing in a long chain of things. Even the climax, which should bring everything together, can feel like the film is still trying to prove how much it can do instead of focusing on what matters most. That is the irony. A movie celebrating stunt work sometimes does not give its own stunt work enough room to land. It is like the film is afraid that if it slows down, the audience will lose interest. But honestly, some of the best parts would have worked better with a little more space. Let the action breathe. Let Colt and Jody have fewer but sharper conversations. Let the Hollywood satire hit harder instead of scattering it everywhere. Let the mystery be simpler if the real focus is the characters and the stunt world, because more is not always more. Sometimes more is just noise. And The Fall Guy is not a bad movie because it has too many ideas. Plenty of great movies are packed with ideas. The problem is that this one does not always organize them with enough confidence. It keeps jumping between moods instead of building them. It keeps adding layers instead of strengthening the core. Still, I cannot pretend the overload has no charm. There is something entertaining about how full the film is. Even when a scene does not work, another one is already racing towards you. Even when the plot feels thin, the movie has enough personality to keep moving. It is messy, yes, but it is rarely lifeless. That is why the overstuffed nature of The Fall Guy is both its appeal and its weakness. It gives the movie its lively, chaotic flavor, but it also keeps the film from becoming as sharp, emotional, or memorable as it could have been. The weirdest thing about The Fall Guy is that for a movie filled with explosions, fistfights, car chases, burning wreckage, and a stuntman constantly getting thrown into danger, it can still feel strangely mild. Not boring exactly, just mild. That is the word that keeps coming back, because the movie has all the pieces of something wild, but it rarely feels like it wants to go all the way with any of them. It wants to be an action movie, but not too intense. It wants to be a comedy, but not too outrageous. It wants to be romantic, but not too emotionally messy. It wants to be a Hollywood satire, but not too sharp. It wants to be absurd, but still safe enough for everyone in the room. And because of that, the tone sometimes lands in this comfortable middle zone, which is fine for a casual popcorn movie, but a little frustrating for a film that clearly has the setup to be stranger, funnier, and more memorable. Take the action, for example. Colt is thrown into real danger, but the movie keeps everything light. Life-threatening moments are usually played like comedy. That can work, especially because Colt is a stuntman, and the whole joke is that his professional skill set suddenly applies to real chaos. But the film never really makes the danger feel dangerous. You are not sitting there thinking, oh, he might not get out of this. You are thinking, okay, what stunt gag are they setting up next? That is enjoyable, but it lowers the tension. Then there is the comedy. The film has funny moments, definitely. Some jokes land. A few references are clever. Some of the absurdity works, but it often feels like the movie is pulling its punches. It flirts with being ridiculous, then backs away before it becomes truly bold. It references old movies, Hollywood habits, celebrity vanity, stunt culture, and filmmaking cliches, but a lot of those jokes stay on the surface. You can feel a sharper version of the movie hiding underneath, a version that really takes apart the ego of movie stars, a version that turns Colt and Jodie's reunion into a chaotic screwball disaster, a version that makes the mystery either much sillier or much more dangerous, a version that lets the absurdity fully take over instead of keeping it polished and audience-friendly. But this version keeps smoothing the edges. That is not always a bad thing. Part of the reason the film is easy to watch is because it does not become too harsh, too violent, too cynical, or too weird. It is designed to be a crowd pleaser. You can feel that in nearly every scene. The soundtrack is energetic, the stars are likable, the action is glossy, the jokes are accessible, and the romance is soft enough that it never becomes too painful. The movie wants everyone to have a good time. The problem is that when a film tries too hard to please everyone, it can start losing personality. That happens here in patches. The story has a lot going on, but the emotional stakes are never too heavy. The action is frequent, but not consistently thrilling. The romance is central, but not deeply passionate. The comedy is constant, but not sharp enough to become hilarious. Everything is present, but everything is kept at a level where it will not scare off the widest possible audience. So instead of feeling bold, the movie sometimes feels calculated. And that is frustrating, because the ingredients are there for something with more bite. Ryan Gosling can handle awkward, absurd comedy. Emily Blunt can handle sharper emotional conflict. Aaron Taylor-Johnson's Tom Ryder could have been an even nastier joke about movie star vanity. The Stunt World tribute could have had more emotional weight. The crime caper could have gone completely mad. Instead, The Fall Guy often chooses the safest version of its own ideas. It gives us danger without real fear, romance without enough ache, comedy without enough madness, satire without enough sting. Now, to be fair, this broadness is also part of why some people will enjoy it. Not every movie needs to be extreme. Sometimes you just want something light, bright, expensive, and easy to digest. And on that level, the tone does work. It is cheerful, it moves, it looks good, it gives you attractive movie stars trading lines while things explode around them. There is an audience for that, absolutely. But the more interesting question is whether The Fall Guy could have been better if it had trusted itself to be a little less safe. Because the film is at its best when it lets the chaos feel specific. When Colt's stuntman background actually shapes the comedy. When Jodie's production pressure becomes part of the tension. When Tom Ryder's fake hero image gets exposed. When the movie lets us enjoy the difference between fake cinematic danger and the real people who make it happen. Those moments have flavor. But too often, the film steps back into a smoother, more familiar blockbuster rhythm. The result is entertaining, but not as distinctive as it wants to be. It has noise, but not always bite. It has movement, but not always impact. It has charm, but not always spark. That is why safe feels like the right criticism, not because the movie is lazy. There is clearly a lot of effort on screen. The stunt teams are working hard, the actors are trying, the production is polished, the film has energy. But effort and personality are not the same thing. The Fall Guy has enough personality to be fun, yet not enough courage to become truly special. It keeps promising something wilder than it finally delivers. And by the end, you may still have had a good time, but you might also feel like the movie stayed in second gear when it had every reason to slam the pedal down. For a film about people who take big risks for a living, that feels a little ironic. For all the talk about romance, mystery, Hollywood satire, and movie star ego, let's be honest, the real reason The Fall Guy exists is the stunt work. That is the thing the movie keeps coming back to, and honestly it should. Because whenever the story starts feeling thin, whenever the romantic conversations stretch a little too long, whenever the mystery becomes slightly too messy for its own good, the film usually finds its pulse again by throwing Colt into some kind of physical chaos. A car rolls, a body flies, something explodes. Someone crashes through a situation they absolutely should not survive, and suddenly the movie remembers what it is best at. The action in The Fall Guy has a very specific kind of appeal because it is not just action for action's sake. It is action built around the identity of its main character. Colt is not a superhero. He is not a spy. He is not a soldier. He is a stuntman, and that changes the flavor of every set piece. He knows how movie danger works. He knows how to fall without completely destroying himself. He knows how vehicles are supposed to flip. He knows how fights are supposed to be staged. He understands timing, movement, impact, and the strange little tricks that make something look deadly on camera. So when the danger becomes real, there is a fun irony to it. Colt is constantly being pulled into situations that feel like action scenes, except now there is no comfortable separation between performance and survival. Nobody is calling cut. Nobody is resetting the take. The bruises are not just part of the job anymore. They are part of the problem. That is where the film gets some of its best energy. The stunts give The Fall Guy a sense of personality that the plot does not always provide. You can feel the movie enjoying the mechanics of action, the crashes, the timing, the movement, the way a stunt has to be designed so it looks wild but still follows a kind of physical logic. There is pleasure in watching a film that clearly wants to celebrate that craft, and some of the set pieces are genuinely fun. The car work gives the movie a real jolt. The pyrotechnics have that old-school blockbuster thrill. The boat chase adds a different kind of movement. The fights may not always reinvent anything, but they keep the film loose and physical. There is always this sense that Colt is being dragged through one ridiculous situation after another, and the movie is at its most entertaining when it simply lets that happen. This is why the stunts often feel like the safety net of the whole film. When the screenplay starts wobbling, the action catches it. When the romance slows down, the action wakes it back up. When the missing star mystery starts feeling too familiar, the stunts give it texture. And that is important, because without those physical sequences, The Fall Guy would probably feel much more ordinary. The story alone is not strong enough to carry 2 hours with the same energy. The jokes alone are not sharp enough. Even the star chemistry, depending on how much it works for you, can only do so much. But the action gives the movie a reason to be seen on a big screen. It gives the film scale. It gives it movement. It gives it that popcorn movie charge where you stop worrying about whether the plot is airtight and just enjoy watching people throw themselves into controlled disaster. That is also why the stuntman angle matters so much. The movie is not just showing action scenes. It is trying to make you think about the people who create action scenes, the bodies behind the spectacle. The professionals who make movie stars look fearless. The workers who turn danger into entertainment, then often disappear from the audience's memory once the scene is over. Colt represents that invisible labor. Every time he gets thrown into another stunt-heavy moment, the movie is reminding us that action does not magically appear on screen. Someone planned it, someone practiced it, someone took the fall, someone got the timing right. Someone made sure the danger looked exciting without becoming a tragedy. That layer gives the set pieces more meaning than they might have had in a normal action comedy. Still, the movie is not always perfect in how it presents them. Sometimes you want the film to slow down and let the stunts breathe a little more. Sometimes the editing, jokes, or plot noise crowd the action when the action should be the star. But even with that issue, the stunt work remains the clearest reason to watch. This is the part of The Fall Guy that feels most sincere. The romance can feel uneven. The story can feel thin. The comedy can be hit or miss. But the movie's affection for stunt work feels real. You can sense that it actually cares about this world. The rigs, the falls, the car rolls, the controlled fires, the physical risk, the whole beautifully ridiculous machinery of making danger safe enough to film. And that affection carries a lot of weight, because when The Fall Guy is simply letting stunt people do what stunt people do best, it becomes the movie it clearly wants to be. Loud, physical, playful, and full of appreciation for a craft that usually gets hidden behind the face of a star. The plot may not always land, but the falls do. There is no shortage of action in The Fall Guy. That part is very clear. The movie gives you car crashes, fights, explosions, stunt rehearsals, pyrotechnics, boat chaos, physical comedy, and enough bodies flying through the frame to remind you every few minutes what kind of film you are watching. It is busy, it is loud, it is constantly moving. Even when the story slows down, the movie usually has another set piece waiting around the corner. But here is the thing. Having a lot of action is not the same as having great action. And that is where The Fall Guy becomes a little complicated. Some sequences absolutely work. When the film lets the stunts take center stage, there is a real kick to it. You can feel the planning behind the movement. You can feel the physicality. There is a pleasure in watching a movie that wants crashes and falls to have weight, instead of making everything look like weightless computer animation. Those moments are satisfying. They have that old school feeling where you are not only watching the character survive the stunt, you are also thinking about the people who had to design it, rehearse it, perform it, and capture it on camera. That gives the action a texture that a lot of modern blockbusters do not always have. But not every action scene lands with the same impact. Sometimes the movie has the right idea, but the scene itself feels too crowded. There's a joke happening, a plot point happening, a romantic beat floating nearby, and then the action is squeezed into the middle of it. Instead of being allowed to breathe, the stunt becomes one more ingredient in an already overpacked sequence. And that is frustrating, because the whole movie is supposed to be celebrating stunt work. So when the action is interrupted, rushed, or buried under too much surrounding noise, it feels like the film is accidentally working against its own tribute. You want to admire the stunt. You want the camera to hold a little longer. You want the rhythm to let the impact register. But sometimes the Fall Guy is so determined to stay playful and fast that it does not give its best physical moments the full dramatic space they deserve. That is why the action can feel uneven. There is a lot of it, yes. The quantity is definitely there, but the quality changes from scene to scene. Some sequences have real energy and personality. Others feel more routine, like the movie is checking the action comedy box before rushing to the next joke or plot twist. And for a film built around stunt performers, that matters. A few reviewers praised the action as outstanding, and I understand why. There are moments where the craftsmanship is obvious. The car work, the explosions, the practical effects, they give the film a tangible blockbuster pulse. If you're watching it in a theater, especially on a big screen, that physical scale does help. But there is also a fair argument that the action is good rather than amazing. Not bad, not lazy. Just not always as memorable as the movie seems to think it is. Part of that comes from expectation. When a film sells itself as a love letter to stunt people, you naturally expect the set pieces to be not just frequent, but unforgettable. You expect them to build, escalate, and maybe even surprise you. And while The Fall Guy does provide plenty of spectacle, it does not always deliver that next-level feeling where a scene burns itself into your memory. Some action scenes entertain in the moment, then fade pretty quickly. That is not the worst crime for a popcorn movie, but it does keep the film from becoming truly special. There is also the issue of tension. Colt is constantly in danger, but the movie's tone is so light that the danger rarely feels serious. Again, that can be fun. This is not trying to be a brutal thriller. It is an action comedy. Still, if the audience never feels real risk, then the action has to be either incredibly funny, incredibly inventive, or incredibly thrilling to compensate. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is not. The best action in the film happens when it connects directly to Colt's identity as a stuntman. When he uses his understanding of fake danger to survive real danger, the scenes have a clever little twist. They feel specific to this movie, not just borrowed from any other action comedy. The weaker moments are the ones that could belong to almost anything. A fight, a chase, a burst of chaos, entertaining enough but not always distinctive. And that is really the difference. The Fall Guy has plenty of action, but its most memorable action is the stuff that feels tied to the stunt world concept. The more generic the set piece becomes, the more you notice the thinness of the story underneath it. Still, even when the action is uneven, it keeps the film alive. It gives the movie movement. It gives Colt something physical to push through. It reminds us why stunt performers matter. And even when a sequence does not fully land, there is usually enough energy on screen to keep the audience from completely checking out. So the action is both a strength and a missed opportunity. There is enough of it to make the movie feel big. There is enough practical craft to make it worth appreciating. But there is not always enough focus, tension, or originality to make every set piece hit as hard as it should. For a regular action comedy, that might be fine. For a movie about stunt work, you naturally want a little more. You want the falls to hurt, the crashes to sing, the timing to pop, and the camera to make you feel the danger without hiding the work. The Fall Guy reaches that level in flashes. I just wish it stayed there longer. One of the things The Fall Guy clearly wants you to appreciate is that not everything in action cinema has to feel weightless. And honestly, that matters. Because we have reached a point where so many big movies are packed with digital destruction that after a while, the spectacle can start to blur together. A city collapses, a spaceship crashes, a superhero punches through a digital wall. The screen is full of movement, but sometimes you do not feel the impact. It looks expensive, sure, but not always physical. The Fall Guy is trying to push back against that a little. It wants to remind you that action used to have bodies behind it, wheels on the ground, fire that actually burned, cars that actually flipped, people who had to rehearse, measure, fall, crash, and trust the crew around them. That old-school feeling is one of the film's strongest qualities, because the story is not just using stunt work as decoration. It is built around the idea that real physical craft still has value. And when the movie leans into that, it feels refreshing. There is something different about watching action when you can sense the weight of it. A car roll feels different when it looks like something actually happened in front of a camera. A fall feels different when the body has gravity. An explosion feels different when the actors and stunt teams are reacting to something more tangible than a tennis ball on a stick. That is not to say CGI is bad. Of course not. Modern visual effects can be incredible, and almost every large production uses them in some way. Even The Fall Guy is not pretending that post-production magic does not exist. There are touch-ups, polish, and digital help where needed, but the attitude feels different. The movie is not trying to replace physical action with computer-generated noise. It is trying to support practical work, not bury it. That distinction is important, because the best moments in the film have a sense of texture. You can feel the stunt team's fingerprints on them. The action has dents, speed, timing, and a bit of real-world messiness. It does not always look perfectly clean, and that is part of the appeal. Real stunt work should have a little danger in its posture, even when everything is carefully controlled. That is why the behind-the-scenes footage during the credits hits so well. After watching the film play with Hollywood fakery for 2 hours, it is genuinely satisfying to see how some of those moments were achieved. You see the process. You see the bodies, you see the preparation. And suddenly, the movie's whole tribute to stunt performers feels less like a slogan and more like proof. The credits almost make the argument better than the movie itself. They say, look, this is what people actually did. And that is powerful because action cinema often hides its labor. The audience sees the star, the camera angle, the final polished image. We rarely think about the person who took the hit or the team that built the safety system around it. The Fall Guy wants to pull that invisible work into the light. That is where the practical effects become more than just a technical choice. They become part of the film's personality. The movie is basically saying that the real thrill of action is not just the illusion of danger. It is knowing that somewhere behind the illusion, real people performed something difficult with skill, timing, and courage. That gives the film a warmth that a fully digital action sequence usually cannot create on its own. Still, there is a small issue. At certain points, some of the action can still look a little too polished or too blended with modern blockbuster gloss. There are moments where you might wonder what is real and what has been digitally enhanced. And for a movie that is so clearly celebrating practical stunt work, it maybe should have made that physical craftsmanship even more obvious inside the main film, not just during the credits. Because if you're making a movie about stunt performers, let us feel the stunt performers. Let the camera hold. Individually, none of that is useless. But together, you start to feel the movie warming up for a long time before it truly becomes the caper it is supposed to be. And that is where the pacing gets uneven. Sometimes the film feels fast. Sometimes it feels strangely delayed. It keeps jumping between tones and storylines, but the main plot does not always move forward with the same urgency. Colt is supposed to be finding Tom, Jody is trying to save her movie, Gail is hiding things, and danger is slowly building around them. But the movie often pauses for banter, references, meta jokes, and romantic detours. Some of those pauses are fun, some of them stretch. That is the difference. A movie like this does not need to be short, but it needs to feel light on its feet. The Fall Guy wants to have that breezy popcorn rhythm, but at around 2 hours, you do start noticing the extra weight. Scenes that should snap sometimes wander. Conversations that should sparkle sometimes keep going past the point. Action beats that should escalate the story sometimes feel more like separate attractions placed along the ride. It is not that the movie has no rhythm. It is that the rhythm keeps changing. The editing plays a big part in that. There are moments where the film cuts quickly, keeps the jokes moving, and gives the action a nice sense of forward motion. Then there are other scenes where the edit seems unsure what to prioritize. Do we focus on the stunt, the comedy, the romance, the fake movie inside the movie, the mystery, the industry satire? Sometimes the answer is all of it at once. And when that happens, the movie becomes crowded instead of exciting. One of the more frustrating things is that some set pieces feel interrupted by the film's need to keep every subplot alive. A major action moment should be allowed to build pressure, land impact, and leave the audience with a clear memory. But the Fall Guy occasionally cuts away or layers too many ideas over the top, so the scene does not hit as cleanly as it could. That is a real issue for a movie celebrating stunt work. If the stunt is the point, let us see the stunt. Let it breathe. Let the audience feel the timing. Let the danger, even comic danger, have a shape. The film has enough practical craft and physical effort on screen that it should not need to hide behind restless editing or constant interruptions. The final act also carries some of the biggest pacing problems. By the time the movie reaches its climax, it should feel like everything is coming together. Colt's comeback, Jodie's movie, Tom Ryder's fake hero image, Gale's manipulation, the stunt tribute, and the romance. And in a broad sense, yes, that is what the film tries to do, but it also starts to drag. The last stretch feels bigger, louder, and more complicated than it needs to be. Some viewers will enjoy the chaos because it gives the movie that full blockbuster finish. Others may feel the film has already made its point and is now just extending the ride. The climax wants to be fun and explosive, but it also feels overstuffed, like the movie is still adding layers when it should be tightening the screws. Then, even after the story feels like it has ended, the movie keeps going. Now, to be fair, the behind-the-scenes credit footage is genuinely enjoyable. It connects beautifully to the stunt performer tribute and gives the audience a real look at the work behind the spectacle. The bonus material has value. It is not just random padding, but combined with the already long runtime, it can make the overall experience feel extended. You get the ending, then the credits material, then extra scenes, then nostalgic nods, and while some of it is fun, the movie does not always know when to let the audience leave with a clean final impression. That is the key pacing issue. The Fall Guy has trouble stopping itself. It wants one more joke, one more reference, one more emotional beat, one more stunt, one more behind-the-scenes wink, one more nostalgic surprise. And again, a lot of these things are enjoyable on their own. But at a certain point, the movie starts feeling like someone kept saying, "We can't cut that, it's fun," until the whole thing became slightly too full. A tighter version probably would have worked better. Not a stripped-down version, not a serious version, just a cleaner one. Cut some repetition from the romance. Sharpen the mystery earlier. Give the stunts more room instead of more surrounding noise. Let the climax arrive with more focus. The movie did not need fewer ideas as much as it needed firmer control over when and how those ideas appeared, because pacing is not only about speed, it is about emphasis. It is about knowing which moments deserve space and which moments should move quickly. It is about understanding when the audience needs a breath and when they need momentum. The Fall Guy has plenty of movement, but not always the right emphasis. That is why it can feel both fast and long. It is busy enough that you are rarely staring at the screen with nothing to watch, but loose enough that you still feel the runtime. You enjoy pieces of it, but you also sense that the movie could have been sharper if someone had trimmed the excess and trusted the strongest material. And that is a shame, because the ingredients are there. The cast is likable. The stunt work is worth celebrating. The premise has charm. The Hollywood setting gives it flavor. But the pacing and editing keep the film from reaching that effortless action comedy glide it is clearly aiming for. It is a fun ride, just not as smooth as it should be. And for a movie built around people who know the value of timing, that feels like one of its biggest missed opportunities. One thing I will give The Fall Guy without much hesitation. The movie looks and sounds like a proper big-screen piece of entertainment. Even when the story gets messy, even when the romance circles around itself, even when the mystery feels thinner than it should, the film usually has enough visual polish to keep your eyes interested. It is bright, glossy, busy, and very aware that it is supposed to feel like a summer blockbuster, and on that level, it mostly delivers. The movie has this clean, expensive energy to it. The sets are big, the locations have scale. The stunt sequences are staged with a sense of spectacle. The fictional sci-fi movie Metal Storm gives the production design a chance to go a little ridiculous in a fun way, with all the fake blockbuster imagery, dramatic costumes, and overblown genre flavor that come with a movie inside a movie. That fake movie could have looked cheap or lazy, but it has enough personality to work as part of the joke. You understand instantly what kind of film Jodie is trying to make. It is huge, dramatic, a little silly, and exactly the sort of production where a missing star would send everyone into panic mode. The design of that world helps sell the chaos around it. It gives the film a colorful backdrop, and it lets the real story bounce against this fake sci-fi epic in a way that feels playful. Then you have Sydney. The Australian setting gives the movie a different kind of visual flavor. Sydney Harbour and the surrounding locations are used well enough to make the film feel bigger than just another studio backlot action comedy. There is a sense of sunlight, open space, water, city movement, and location-based spectacle that helps the film breathe, especially when Colt's investigation pulls him beyond the movie set. The opera house and harbor material add a nice postcard quality without turning the movie into a travel commercial. It looks good, not in a deeply artistic, every frame is a painting kind of way. That is not really what this movie is trying to be. It is more about clean blockbuster readability, attractive stars, big locations, practical movement, bright surfaces, loud action, and enough visual variety to keep the 2-hour runtime from feeling completely stuck in one mode. The cinematography helps most when it respects the physical work, because with a movie like this, the camera has a responsibility. If the film is celebrating stunt performers, then the audience needs to actually see the stunt work. We need to feel the shape of the movement, the timing of the fall, the distance of the jump, the weight of the crash. The more clearly the camera captures those details, the more the movie's whole tribute makes sense, and in many moments it does. There are action beats where the frame gives you enough of the stunt to appreciate the planning behind it. You can see the car work, the fire, the bodies, the timing. The movie is not always perfect about letting those moments breathe, but when the visual presentation lines up with the stunt work, the film has real impact. That is where the technical side feels most valuable, not just because it looks expensive, but because it helps us understand the craft. The sound design and soundtrack also do a lot of heavy lifting. This is a movie that knows music can push an audience through a scene, even when the plot is not doing the strongest work. The soundtrack gives the film a nostalgic kick, especially with the 80s flavor and those familiar needle drop choices. It keeps things lively, it adds personality, it gives the action a little extra bounce. Sometimes the music is doing almost too much, but honestly, that fits the movie's personality. The Fall Guy is not subtle. It is not trying to be subtle. It wants the music loud, the jokes broad, the action big, and the emotions easy to read. So when the soundtrack leans into that bright, throwback energy, it helps the film feel like the breezy popcorn ride it wants to be. There are also little sound references that add to the nostalgic mood. The $6 Million Man sound effect, the Miami Vice cue, those playful old-school touches, they are not major story elements, but they give the movie extra texture. They tell you the film knows what era it is reaching back toward. It wants to feel modern, but it also wants that older action TV and 80s blockbuster spirit running underneath. The costumes, hair, makeup, and production details contribute to that same glossy world. Tom Ryder looks and feels like a manufactured action star. Colt has that bruised but still movie star stuntman look. Jodie's world as a director has its own organized chaos. Gail's presence has that polished producer confidence. Even the side characters feel like they belong to a heightened version of Hollywood where everyone is slightly exaggerated, but not completely cartoonish. That is important because the movie lives in a heightened space. It is not realistic Hollywood. It is movie Hollywood. Everything is just a little louder, smoother, shinier, and more absurd than reality. The technical craft supports that tone, even when the writing is uneven. Now, the visual presentation does have limits. Sometimes the film is so polished that the danger loses a little texture. Sometimes you want the stunts to feel rougher, more immediate, more clearly physical. And sometimes the editing does not let the technical work fully register. A stunt may be impressive, but if the movie cuts too quickly or layers too many jokes around it, you do not get the full thrill of watching the craft unfold. That is frustrating because the craft is there. You can feel the effort from the stunt teams, the camera team, the production crew, the sound department, and everyone involved in building this big chaotic playground. This is not a lazy-looking film. Even people who do not love the movie usually admit that the action scenes, visuals, and overall presentation keep it watchable, and that says something. A weaker-looking version of this same story would probably collapse under its own screenplay problems, but because The Fall Guy has scale, color, movement, and technical confidence, it stays entertaining even when the narrative is not fully holding together. That is the difference between a forgettable small mess and a watchable blockbuster mess. The movie has enough craft to keep you engaged. It gives you locations worth looking at, stunts worth appreciating, music worth hearing, and a polished Hollywood setting that matches the story's behind-the-scenes theme. It knows how to look like a movie about movies, and that matters. The whole film is built around spectacle, illusion, and the people who create both, so the technical presentation cannot feel half-hearted. Thankfully, it does not. If the screenplay is the weak spine, the craft is the muscle. It keeps the film standing. It gives the stunt tribute credibility. It gives the action weight when the direction lets it breathe. It gives the romance a glamorous backdrop. It gives the Hollywood satire its shiny surface. So even if The Fall Guy does not always work as a story, it often works as a piece of visual and sonic entertainment. It is the kind of movie where you may forget parts of the plot after a while, but you remember the feeling of the big screen. The cars, the fire, the music, the bright locations, the movie set chaos, the sense that everyone involved is trying to give the audience a good time. And sometimes with a film like this, that craft is what keeps the whole thing from falling harder than Colt ever does. By the time The Fall Guy ends, the easiest reaction is probably this: I had fun, but I also wanted more. And that is the strange place this movie lands. It is not some lifeless studio product with nothing going for it. that would be easier to dismiss. There is real energy here. Ryan Gosling is charming. Emily Blunt brings warmth. The stunt work has sincerity behind it. The movie set setting gives it flavor. The soundtrack keeps things moving. And when the film remembers that it is supposed to be a celebration of the people who make action cinema possible, it actually has a heart. That is the part I liked most. There is something genuinely likable about a big Hollywood movie stopping for a second and saying, "Hey, look at the stunt people. Look at the ones who fall, crash, burn, roll, jump, and make everyone else look heroic." That affection feels real, and it gives The Fall Guy a warmth that saves it from becoming just another noisy action comedy. But warmth does not fix everything. The movie is fun, yes, but it is also messy. It wants to be a romance, a caper, a mystery, a comedy, a Hollywood satire, a stunt tribute, a nostalgic TV adaptation, and a meta movie about making movies. That is a lot of pressure for one story, and you can feel the strain. Some parts work, some parts almost work, some parts feel like they were added because nobody wanted to cut a fun idea, and that is really the movie in a nutshell. A lot of fun ideas, not always enough control. The biggest issue is still the screenplay. The story is too thin for how much the film keeps stacking on top of it. The missing star mystery gives Colt something to do, but it is not strong enough to become truly gripping. The romance gives the movie emotional shape, but it sometimes drags and repeats itself. The comedy has funny moments, but it does not always hit hard enough. The action is frequent, but not every set piece feels as memorable as it should, so the film keeps hovering between good time and missed opportunity. And honestly, that is more frustrating than if it were simply bad. Because you can see the better movie inside this one. A sharper version, a tighter version, a version that lets the stunt work breathe more, gives Jodie more space, makes the romance either funnier or more painful, and trims the mystery down into something cleaner. A version that trusts its strongest idea, the invisible hero behind the movie star, and builds everything around that. Instead, The Fall Guy often tries to do everything. That gives it a lively surface, but it also makes the experience feel uneven. One scene will have charm, the next will feel stretched. One stunt will remind you why practical action still matters. The next sequence will get buried under too much editing or too many jokes. One romantic exchange will feel sweet. The next will feel like the film is circling the same emotional point again. It is not consistent. But it is rarely empty. That matters because even when the movie stumbles, it still has personality. It has enough movie star charm to carry weak beats. It has enough physical craft to keep the action alive. It has enough affection for filmmaking to make the behind-the-scenes world enjoyable. It has enough old-school popcorn energy to make you understand why some viewers will absolutely love it, and some will. For many people, this is exactly the kind of movie they wanted. Attractive leads, light romance, big stunts, jokes, explosions, music, and a story that does not ask to be taken too seriously. Watch it with popcorn, enjoy the ride, stay for the credits, and move on with your life. On that level, it works. But if you wanted it to be great, not just enjoyable, the cracks are hard to ignore. It is too long, too overstuffed, too safe in places, too dependent on Gosling's charm to smooth over weak writing, too willing to treat its best material like one ingredient among many, instead of the thing that should have shaped the whole movie. And that is why the final reaction is so mixed. The Fall Guy is not a failure. It is not a disaster. It is not a movie with nothing to offer, but it is also not the knockout it could have been. It is a glossy, likable, sometimes very entertaining action comedy that celebrates stunt performers with genuine affection, but does not always build a strong enough movie around that celebration. It has the charm. It has the scale. It has the cast. It has the stunts. What it needed was a cleaner story and a sharper sense of focus. Still, I would not call it a waste of time. There are worse ways to spend 2 hours than watching Ryan Gosling get thrown around a film set while Emily Blunt tries to hold a collapsing production together. There is pleasure in that, there is charm in that, and when the credits roll and the real stunt footage starts playing, the movie finally lands its most honest point. These people deserve applause. Maybe the film around them is imperfect, but that message works. So my final feeling is simple. The Fall Guy is a fun popcorn movie with a great idea, a charming lead, and a messy execution. It made me smile. It made me wish it were tighter. It gave me enough to enjoy, but not enough to fully love. And maybe that is the most accurate way to describe it. It falls short of greatness, but at least it falls with style.